The tough part is that for a lot of organizations, and this is not an indictment of all annual performance reviews, but for a lot of companies, annual performance reviews not only don't incentivize, don't enhance performance, but they're actually harming performance. I think there are generations of workers now that are lost. They're struggling to find a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, and I think we can help.
In Search of a Leader is a podcast for those seeking more, a life of purpose, a career that truly matters, and leadership that inspires lasting change.
We have an epidemic that's raging across the country, across the world, and it's called employee disengagement. And unless we begin to talk about this, it's not going to get any better.
Together, we go in search of a leader.
Okay, got to tell you about a dream I had for years after I got out of college. In the dream, I'm walking into a final exam for a class that I've somehow forgotten to attend. And the professor's passing out an exam, and I know that I signed up for this class, but I either A, forgot to attend it, or B, just blew it off, or C, just didn't care. But the exam is being passed out now, and I've got this nauseous feeling in the pit of my stomach because I know I'm going to flunk this thing. And I'm going to flunk it big time. And for some reason, I don't know what the class is. It's so big that it's going to dictate the rest of my college life, the job that I eventually get. My whole life is ruined. I mean, that's the feeling. I used to think I was the only one that had that dream until I started talking to some of my friends, and they said, no, I got something kind of similar, and they would relate their experience. And I go, why do we feel this? And in retrospect, when I think about it, I think it's kind of a PTSD light. You know, a period in your time in your life when you're going, okay, I just got to hit this thing. I got to hit it. And for some reason, I think I'm unprepared and I'm gonna flop. I share that because I think there are a lot of people that work for a living that have a similar experience, and they get it at least once a year. You know what that is?
No, I have no idea.
Well, here is the common denominator, and it's why I bring it up now. For a lot of companies, there's this thing called the annual performance review. Now, annual performance reviews vary by industry and they vary by company.
Right.
But for a lot of companies, the annual performance review is the equivalent of the ultimate pass-fail, where if you get a good mark, like an exceeds or an exceptional, your career goes on. Your merit increase is influenced by this. Your promotability, so much of your career is dependent on what kind of quote-unquote score you get on that annual performance review. The tough part is that for a lot of organizations, and this is not an indictment of all annual performance reviews, but for a lot of companies, annual performance reviews not only don't incentivize, don't enhance performance, but they're actually harming performance.
Yeah.
A lot of managers that administer these performance reviews spend about as much time in preparation for the review as they would their selection of a craft beer on Friday night. And by that I mean they just literally show up and say, all right, let's check the box, let's check the box, let's check the box, and it's done.
Yeah.
And in a lot of companies, there's already a rating that's been arrived at before you have the sit down with the employee.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is poorly administered annual performance reviews hurt, but companies keep doing it.
I've been through my share of annual performance reviews, and it didn't even cross my mind when you asked that question because they were kind of irrelevant, but you had to kind of navigate around them. I mean, we maybe spent 15, 20 minutes doing them, but they were detrimental, and I understand the fear that comes with them because a bad annual review is worse than a fail. You start thinking about, oh man, does this mean I need to leave the company if this is how they feel about me? Is this going to influence my life moving forward? If I go to another company, is this going to follow with me? Yeah. So yeah, they're scary.
Yeah.
And they're scary in the sense that like you almost kind of feel they're outside of your control. Why do we still do them if they're so detrimental, but also in some ways irrelevant to actually making the employee better?
Yeah, well, you ask 10 people that question, you'll get 10 different responses, but here's the reality. A lot of things we do in the business world and life in general, we do because we've always done them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. You can ask 100 human resources professionals, do annual performance reviews actually enhance performance? And 70 of them will go, no. And then you ask the follow-up question, why do you do it? Well, because that's what we have to do. So in many ways, it is a check the box that allows the company to have some sense of documentation. So if you do a downsizing or an upsizing or a side sizing, you at least have something that says, here's something in the record that justifies that this individual has gotten feedback. But here's the problem. When annual performance reviews become singular events, something that's conducted at the end of the year, but there's no dialogue, no conversation that takes place during the year, they're totally worthless. And more often than not, you sit down as the employee and you're just waiting to find out, did I get a thumbs up? Did I get a thumbs down? And there's nothing there that really justifies on either case. So I bring it up because one of the things I'm challenged with doing when I work with organizations is to talk about strategy.
Mm-hmm.
The tough part that most people don't recognize with strategy is that, strategy is a framework for decision making, and one of the toughest pieces to recognize if you really implement strategies, you have to decide what not to do, what to stop doing. Stop doing is really tough for a lot of companies. Annual performance reviews is one of those examples. I have an acronym that we use when we talk about strategy, and it offends people, but I use it anyway. STOP is an acronym for Stupidity That Obstructs Progress. Stupidity that obstructs progress. Annual performance reviews for a lot of companies isn't driving performance, it's compromising, and frankly, it's ticking people off.
Yeah. You use the word singular event. Why is it that we're delivering feedback a lot of times that is constructive in nature once a year as opposed to throughout the year? Why is it so? Is it difficult to deliver that level of feedback, or that's just the only opportunity for organizations to deliver that level of feedback?
It's never the latter.
Okay.
If you work with someone, you can give feedback often, but the problem is we have a lot of leaders that are reluctant because, after all, I don't want to hurt anybody's feeling, or hey, I'd rather just not go there. We always say, look, if you don't care about the person, tell them what they want to hear. If you do care about them, tell them the truth. So good coaches make that a conversation that's ongoing throughout the year. Bad coaches wait until they have to do it and say, okay, David, here's your annual performance review. This is how I see you. And the reality is, at the end of the year, what are you going to do then? It's like, you played a lot of football. What if at the end of the season, the coach said to you, had you been better in coverage, you could have maybe played more games. Well, how come you didn't tell me after the first game?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Just didn't think of it.
Yeah.
That's what kills people.
Well, it's funny because in some ways, I haven't thought about this in a while, some managers actually gamify the annual performance review where you don't score high.
That's right.
To, I don't want to say irritate, but say you're still developing, improve.
Yeah.
And they use this score as a mechanism of, hey, stay engaged, continue to improve, when in many ways you actually just irritated and alienated
That's right.
that person along the way instead of providing that coaching or that feedback. And I think it comes back to that singular event. How do we coach better?
Yeah. Well, coaching is arguably one of the most underestimated attributes an organization can develop. We lean heavily on training and we dismiss coaching. If I have a $100,000 budget and $90,000 is on training and $10,000 is on coaching, the first thing we say is flip it. Spend $10,000 on training and then double down on coaching. Because you can have a mediocre training program, but if you have great coaches, it's pull through.
Yeah.
You can have a great training program, but if you have mediocre coaches, nothing is pull through. That's just a harsh reality.
Well, it also empowers your frontline leaders. I would imagine most people that go in that role do want to be a coach. They do want to have the empowerment to develop people. And in some ways, moving from leadership development, which is more of a program,
Right.
to coaching, which is more about the individual, everyone benefits,
Right.
including the people that need the coaching as well as the coaches themselves, that everyone benefits by doing that. So I'll ask the question again, why is it skewed towards leadership development programs as opposed to more conversational coaching, one-on-one, but really the frequency that comes from those interactions? Why have we gotten to this point?
I think that's a complicated question, and there's a fairly simple answer. I think you have to ask yourself, what is it that a coach or a manager or supervisor is charged with doing? And if you really stop and think about it, there are three core capabilities. You need to be able to recruit top talent, you need to be able to develop the talent, and then you need to be able to build all those individual pieces into a whole.
Right.
Developing the talent has become, for some reason, something that's almost an afterthought, and it's creating problems. In fact, again, one of the things that we spend time talking about is, can you speak truth to power? In my role as a consultant, I have to speak truth to power. So saying to organizations or leaders, here's things that you need to either modify or stop doing. Annual performance reviews are one, but here's another one. And a lot of people disagree with this. Employee engagement surveys. You're smiling. Why are you smiling?
Oh man. All right. We'll go there. I was part of a Tiger team
Right.
that looked at employee engagement surveys or organizational health surveys. They're all kind of rooted in the same thing. And what was so interesting is we looked at the number of people that were filling out the survey as if that was more important than the results of the survey. Yeah. And if you had 10 out of 10 fill it, oh, this is great, we have engagement on the survey. And then when we actually get the feedback, it almost became a marketing point to go, okay, this is what we did well, let's brand that, and let's evangelize that within our organizations of the things that we did well. I understand that. That's great. You got to be optimistic. But the things that there were room for improvement, we turned a blind eye to it. And I always wondered, is this an accountability issue? We don't want to address some of these things. Are they too difficult to address? I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
But the employee engagement surveys got to a point where it was offensive to even conduct them because it became just a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, the worst thing you can do with an engagement survey is do nothing with the results.
Yeah.
The second worst thing you can do is to monitor completion rates. That becomes an almost perverse incentive where Department A has completed 80%, Department B has completed 85%. So good job, Department B. It has nothing to do. It's almost like the old axiom, the beatings will continue until morale improves. So you say, you got to complete this damn thing, and then nothing happens with it. So one of the things that we say, there's a great example. Goodhart's law says that when the measure becomes the target, it's no longer a valid measure. So when you take completion rates and say, you got to do 100%, but then you gather all the feedback and nothing happens with it, again, it's a classic example of a perverse indicator. You've put something in place that actually doesn't improve things. It makes things worse. I think you and I have talked about it before, but there's something called the Cobra Effect, which colonial India years ago, when the British were in control at one of the cities, I want to say Calcutta, I don't know, they had an infestation of cobras. So the political leadership said, we've got to get rid of this, so we'll set up a bounty for cobras. You bring in a cobra, you get a reward, you get a stipend. So here's what happened. Some very astute citizens said, if they're going to give me X amount for one cobra, I'll breed cobras, and I'll bring in 5 and 6 and 7. This is a true story. And so they literally started breeding cobras. And then the government realized what was going on. They said, oh, don't do that anymore. So they stopped. And what happened?
Assume there's more cobras.
They released the cobras.
Oh, God.
They released the cobras. So that's a classic example of where you take a measure and the measure becomes the target and it actually becomes a perverse incentive. That's why we say, if you're really going to make engagement surveys a part of your culture, for God's sakes, demand that whoever's responsible for them do something with them. I've worked with clients before that literally got them, they looked at them and said, okay, that's really good. Do a PowerPoint presentation and off you go. That's the last you ever heard of it. What happens after 2 or 3 years? People go, I'm not going to fill out this blankety blank thing. It's a bunch of BS. And that's what happens.
Is there any benefit to them as like a therapeutic release valve where it's like just letting everyone express their frustrations, or as the fear of voicing those concerns trumped actually sharing how they feel? Is there any level of transparency that benefits the organizations to conducting them, or they just become destructive.
Well, it's cathartic if somebody does something with it.
Okay.
It's not cathartic if people take it, put it in the drawer somewhere, and say, okay, we'll do another annual performance or another engagement survey a year from now.
Yeah.
That's when it's no longer cathartic. Here's what really, we always talk about what are you going to stop doing with
Yeah.
strategy? Here's a radical thought. What if you got leaders and said, I want you to get out of your office and talk with people. And instead of waiting for a formal survey, ask them, what do you like about this company? What do you not like? How do you feel about what you're doing right now? How can I help you? Again, the power of a dialogue as opposed to simply trying to create a process. All these things really are indicative of organizations that don't either have the courage or they have a fear of conflict. And so they just say, we'll create a process and we'll find out that way. Another example of stupidity that obstructs progress. And here's another one for you. And this one's probably pretty controversial too. For a lot of organizations, one of the best things, one of the most important things that you can stop doing, over half the meetings, sometimes 3/4 of the meetings.
I agree with that.
Why?
Oh,
I think I
man.
know, but why?
So I come from a sales background, and I started my career as 100% commission sales representative. I knew down to the hour and to the day, if I was pulled out of the territory, how much it was going to cost me personally.
Right.
So much so that when I went on vacation, I knew not just how much the beach house rental would cost, but how much pulling me out of the territory would personally cost me. And it was significant. And I thought about that. And when I was pulled into meetings, I was sitting there going, do you understand what this is costing me by being in this meeting? Do you know what this is costing my customers and my clients by me not being productive for them? So yeah, I think the meetings are in a number of ways irrelevant. I actually asked myself the question, if the organizer of a meeting was charged a fee to host that meeting, let's just say it's $100, what percentage of those meetings would actually happen? And I think 90% of them wouldn't happen as a result.
That's exactly right. If you survey senior executives, and I've asked this question before, what percentage of the meetings that you're a part of
Yeah.
actually advance the business? More often than not, they'll say maybe 25, 30%.
Okay.
So that means you eliminate around 3/4. Yes. Are you going to? No. Why? Because that's what we do. So here's what we say when we work with clients to say, if you've got death by meeting is real.
Yeah.
And now with the virtual world, I can kidnap people from across the world. I can get someone from Australia in a meeting. I can get someone from China, from Great Britain. I can take people and suck them out of their lives and put them in a virtual meeting, and off we go. Death by meeting. So here's the quick fix, and it is ridiculously simple. If you're a meeting coordinator, we say there's 3 things we want you to do from this point forward. Every meeting you ever conduct for now through eternity. Every time you have a meeting, you should be able to articulate, number 1, the purpose, why you're having the meeting. Number 2, you should be able to articulate the objectives, hopefully never more than 2 or 3, which is what you want to accomplish. Purpose is why, objectives is what. And finally, you should be able to communicate the agenda, which is how. Communicate how you're going to do that in very simple terms. And here's the key. It should be included in your meeting invitation. If it's not included in your meeting invitation, don't have the meeting. Now, when you share that, people's heads blow up. I had a client once who said, well, I can't take the time to articulate why I'm having the meeting. So you're going to take 25 people hostage, and you're going to say, I want you to attend when you yourself don't know why you're having the meeting? I've never thought about it like that before. What's the fully burdened cost of 25 senior executives being called into a meeting without any purpose? And then all of a sudden, things change. So the notion of communicating a POA, but not a plan of action, purpose, objective, agenda, is so ridiculously simple. Once you begin to incorporate it, meetings are either dropped or they become more productive. And we always say, if you're the invitee and it doesn't have a why or a what or a how, a purpose, objective, agenda, exercise your power as a human being, hit reject. You do enough of that, and suddenly things begin to change. That's so stupidly simple, isn't it?
It's incredibly simple, but it's effective, and I think people will make note of that, and they get time back in their lives,
Yeah.
which is, you said something earlier about the remote world. I remember when remote work from anywhere first became very hot, that everyone was more productive at home. And then it kind of skewed towards, okay, we're losing our productivity because everyone's just being locked into a meeting after a meeting after a meeting. Yeah. Salespeople, non-salespeople, whether in marketing, legal, whoever, we just like, let's put a meeting on the calendar. And in some ways, we just filled the calendar.
That's right.
Because why not? So, I mean, yeah, it makes complete sense to me, and it sounds like organizations would benefit, but more importantly, the people part of those organizations are going to go, okay, I feel more productive with my time.
That's right.
Which is incredible. But at the same time, when you have those meetings, they're more impactful. They're actually, there's a purpose behind it.
Yeah, very well said. So I'll give you another stop example.
Yeah, please.
Again, stupidity that obstructs progress.
Yeah.
Very controversial. Most of the emails / text messages that go out through the universe right now, most of them are a complete waste of time.
Or unopened, which is
unopened, that's right.
A big percentage of, I went and looked at some of my emails over the last month. I'm like, good Lord, the amount of emails that I get over the course of a month that never get opened. I mean, there's a lot of information there. So yeah, that makes sense. How do we navigate that then? How can we communicate more effectively?
Using the stop method. And again, one of the biggest challenges with strategy is what you decide to not do. Right. So let me give you some not do's to consider. Any email of more than 250 words, chances of it being read, less than 50%.
Wow.
250 words. Now, most people have a problem right there because it's like, I can't say hello in 250 words. That's the first thing.
That's a tweet.
That's a tweet. Never, ever forward an email stream. Take the chain and stop it because you've got 18 messages, nobody looks at it. Never copy the world on your email. The world doesn't care. Just whoever it is you need to talk to them. In your subject line for an email, this is basic stuff. In your subject line, you should have the topic, number one, the action required or read only. That's the second piece. And then always have either important / urgent, important, or read only. Those three elements should always be in your subject line. Those three elements.
How do you navigate the importance of the email? Because I'm sure to some person, let's say it's a legal topic, they're going to mark everything as important / urgent.
Right.
Do you have to have discipline in saying, okay, this is...
You do. You have to have and the only way, here's what's important, what the recipient thinks, not what the sender thinks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you're right, and I've worked with my share of lawyers, everything's important.
Right.
Because their role is to mediate risk. But if I get 8 messages and none of them are really important, I have no problem in saying, stop, don't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. But if you can develop the discipline to make certain that your email subject line is that simple, then when you send the email, you have basically why you send it, what you're sending for, and the action required. And if you can do it in 250 words or less, you got a chance of actually having your emails read. The reality is, again, most emails aren't read at all.
Is that exclusive to internal emails, or is it also external emails to like clients and customers? And
depends on the industry.
Yeah.
Depends on the industry. I think what we're trying to say to people is, look, less is more.
Yeah.
Whether it's meetings or emails, just stop the madness.
Yeah.
Stop the madness. Again, an example of giving people back their lives. We are all time travelers. You and I are traveling through time at 8,760 hours per year, 1,440 minutes per day. Mm-hmm. The question is, are we optimizing it? The essence of strategy is optimizing your time for maximum productivity. Here's another one. We talk a lot about stop. Here's a big one. And this is controversial because I do a lot of training. I got to tell you, a lot of training's a waste of time. People hear that and go, wait a minute, don't you train? Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm. The issue with training is not training, it's traction.
Explain more of that.
I can come in and give a program on, communication skills, how to conduct a workshop. If there's no one following up on that after the training is administered within 6 months, everything that has been covered has been lost.
It's funny because I've been through a number of sales trainings, price negotiation trainings, leadership development trainings, and going into it, people have the mindset, if I can take away 1 or 2 things at most, And that's like they're literally walking into it going, this is a waste of time, but maybe I'll learn something, just one thing. Is it that the trainings are not productive or the mindset going into these trainings are unproductive?
It's hard to say. I think that when I look at the training that's most successful, there's a couple things.
Okay.
Number one, it's tailored to the needs of the clientele, not just training that's administered for the sake of being training. Number two, there's some level of senior leadership stewardship. In other words, someone saying, hey, we've committed to this, we're going to make sure that it works for us. And three, and again, the most important thing of all is the coaching, the follow-up that takes place after. Let me give you a classic example. Years ago, working with a company that had introduced a new sales call model. Now, you got to understand, companies that are in the commercial space, if they have people creating demand, they usually have some kind of a quote-unquote sales call model, which basically means, how do you handle resistance? How do you address customer needs, et cetera? And there's some fantastic models. I am a big advocate for sales call models. This organization had decided to leave their old sales call model because they said it no longer fits the needs of our clients. They invested, I don't know how much they invested, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. They introduced it to thousands of representatives. It was a big deal, going from sales call model 1 to sales call model 2. So I get invited to a senior leadership forum that's 4 weeks before a national meeting, a national sales meeting that will have thousands in attendance. Sitting in the meeting, head of marketing, head of sales, a number of other people, and they're going through the literature and the resistances and all the things. And at some point, an hour into the meeting, one of the sales leaders picks up a piece of paper and says, I'm confused. I'm listening to the verbiage and how we're handling resistance. This sounds a lot like our old sales call model. Am I just misreading it? And there's a awkward little pause and people look around and meeting goes back. And then 45 minutes later, another sales leader says, guys, this is the XYZ model that we no longer use. How come we're not using the new sales call model? Insert long, awkward pause here. Head of marketing looks over and says, when you say new sales call model, what are you saying? Head of sales looks over and says, well, Harry, 4 months ago, you approved a budget. We've invested $750,000 in a new sales call model. In the past 4 months, we've trained all of our sales representatives on the new sales call model. Harry has a blank look on his face. Everything that we've built here for the campaign that's rolling out in 4 weeks is no longer applicable. That's right, Harry. Sales, marketing, and training, three different channels, and no one had connected the dots. 4 weeks before the national sales campaign, there was a mad dash to retrofit everything that's going to be covered with the new sales call model. Fast forward 2.5 years, the company decides that the new sales call model is no longer relevant to the client needs, and they drop it, and they go to a new one.
So they just keep turning over these models. Some organizations don't even have the models, and I'm wondering, is it better to not have a standard sales model if it's never actually going to be implemented or create chaos? How do you navigate that? So
here's a radical thought. You coach it.
Yeah.
No, it's not better to not have one.
Yeah.
It's better if you're going to invest $750,000 to actually pull it through. That's why I say the issue is not training, it's traction. The most underappreciated asset for most companies. If you develop great coaches, you're going to win. Even if you have a mediocre strategy, you're going to win. So again, what we try to stress to people is, if you want to spend all this money on if you want to bring in high-priced consultants to do your one-day workshop, you can. But I'm more interested in how you're going to pull it through. How can we pull it through? I've said before, if you really want to find a great consultant, find somebody that will agree to work with you based on results, not just paying them a fee. And I consult on leadership development initiatives, and I can tell you, a really good trainer/consultant will do everything to make sure this thing pulls through. And that was the failure of that organization's senior leadership. But the bottom line is, if you don't take the extra effort to pull it through, then you might as well just take the money and flush it, because it's not going to give you any value.
So with all these things that we're stopping, the thing that I hear as the thing that we should start more of,
Right.
And you said strategy is about knowing what to stop doing. It sounds like we need to start coaching more often. How do we begin that process of building coaches, but also making that a staple within organizational culture?
Well, again, we keep going back to a common denominator in every conversation. Great leaders are great developers of people. The most important asset, strategy, you can talk about the tangible, the intangible, but the most important resource you've got is human capital. It's people. When leaders embrace the notion that if I can make the human capital, the people better, everything else gets easier. So again, when I talk about this notion of stupidity that obstructs progress, I think sometimes an easier description is this: stupidity that offends people. Stop doing those things. We'll be more successful and people will be happier, and that's the essence of a great company.
I love it. Thank you guys for listening to In Search of a Leader. Be on the lookout for more episodes to come. Make sure to follow us on social.
For more information, go to insearchofaleader.com.